I always say, never give up on yourself. Love yourself, and do not be ashamed. That for me was the worst thing I could have done. When I look back now, I say to myself, what was I ashamed of? That I couldn't handle something? That because to me it was like, boy, I can handle everything, and you couldn't. So it's like, love yourself, give yourself the time, seek the help that you
Seek the
need,
help.
and never belittle yourself about it or let anybody belittle you about it.
Mary Kay Savarese,
Savarese.
you are seems to be a prolific writer. You've got a best-selling book and
Yes.
a couple, okay. And you're looking to put more yay in your everyday. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So what got you started writing?
A passion that had always been there, Nick, and I always put it on the back burner. And finally, I reached the point where I was starting to become an empty nester. 3 kids. The oldest went off first, and I was thrilled. But I had 2 more, so they were still part of that family unit. And once the first one went off to college, some time opened up for myself where I had this creative urge, and I had to prove to myself that I can actually write a novel. And that's where it started. I had all of these creative ideas, and I love to write in fantasy. My first book that was published, I'm an overnight success, Nick, a 10-year overnight success.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because I just loved it so much. It got me through a difficult time. That's where put the yay, in every day. And I just started to write, and it was a hobby. And the creative part really just helped me along at a very difficult time in my life.
Yeah, it's. I feel like a lot of people have the ability to write. Maybe the ideas are flowing in their head. Maybe they don't have the idea to write it, but they have the ideas.
Yeah.
And when you start to write, when you begin the process, it's like there's a crack in the dam, and the water starts to flow out. There's like pressure that starts to get relieved from that writing process, like letting the ideas out, letting them begin to take form.
Yeah.
And that sounds like kind of what was happening for you too.
Yeah, at the time, it was a wonderful therapy for me because, as I was saying, as finally the last child was a senior in college and 1 year away from graduating, and something started to happen with me. And I had no idea. My limbs were becoming numb, and I thought it was neuropathy. We did all the physical tests and everything. And finally, the doctor just said to me, time to see a therapist. And I went,
wow.
What? Never had to deal with that ever. but nothing was relieving this. What it was, like I said, this numbness that was hitting me, except one thing, my writing. When I would sit down and I would just become so entrenched with the creativity and writing the fantasy fiction, and guess what? I was just concentrating on that. And so it would stop at that point. But as soon as I stopped writing, I still had a problem. You have other hours in the day, you know,
Right.
instead creating all day. And that's why I'm here today, because it's something that I kept as a secret, not only my writing, but that wasn't it. It was just what I was going through, because Nick, I was so embarrassed. Here I was, you know, I worked, I was a mom, I did this, I did that, volunteered, all these wonderful things were happening in my life. Everything was wonderful on the surface, but something was happening on the inner side of Mary K. Savarese, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And my writing really, really did help me, but I had to come to terms with that. And many people do. We're kind of embarrassed. It's like, what? You know, I can deal with this, men and women. And I think I'd love, at this point in my life, I love to talk about it, because I started here on this side of the bridge and I crossed over to here, and I am so blessed and so thankful that I did take that journey, because I learned a lot about myself and how to deal with things in your life, because what I was dealing with was a severe anxiety. It was so severe that it was just numbing body parts.
Yeah. It's taking over.
Yeah.
Was it based on the fact that you had basically been a point of contact and control for the family to kind of maintain the household and the kids and their schedules and all the things? Was everything kind of had a purpose and it was all in line, and then that started to just dissipate? That job basically started to end?
Well, you would think
that's
what, you know, we actually thought as I went into therapy and we talked about it and tried to figure it out. It did become a journey, but it wasn't that. And what I'm going to say is really a shock. And it took me a year and a half before I realized what it truly was. It was the fact that my family unit was dead. And that's a terrible thing to say. But what I mean by that is the babies I raised, the toddlers I chased, the teenagers, I would stay up all night sometimes waiting for them to come home from parties. That was truly dead. And it's amazing when I think back to it, because I would think, yes, okay, it's, and like I said, on the outside, I was always trying to be happy. And I really, you know, I'm thinking, this is wonderful. They're adulting. I did my job. But it was this underneath, just everything was bubbling. And it took me a year and a half before I came to terms with the fact that my family, that's exactly what it was. It was a year and a half to the day that that started, that my family unit, I had to come to terms with my family unit being dead.
Yeah, it was basically like all that sound, all that clamor was just echoes now. You were left with...
And they were in and out, because they did, you know, you see them in a different way, your kids.
Right.
But so those sounds were still there. And it got to the point where those sounds would come back and I was like, okay, I'm happy when they leave.
Okay, go away. Yeah. So you like the freedom, but that feeling or sense that that what was the family was no more.
Yeah, exactly.
Bit of dread that came from that feeling, and then anxiety on top of that. Is that the fear of the future, fear of the unknown?
Fear of, belief for me, it was fear of having the anxiety, because it was like, you know, I've always had anxiety my whole life, but not ever to this point. I was always able to handle it
Yeah.
without taking medication. I get
Right.
to this point in my life where this anxiety approaching depression, even though everything was just so, good in your life, and um, and it was very, very helpful for me to, at that point in my life, to deal with the therapist,
Mm-hmm.
figure things out. And they cannot figure it out for you, which is one thing I've learned. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, meet with the therapist first day, they're going to be able to say, boom, it's that. It is not. They don't tell you it's this, it's
Right.
that. They make you start talking about things. And as I said, it was a year and a half. And when I finally came to terms with that fact that I still had my kids, but the fact that that part of my life was over and dead,
Mm-hmm.
I had to come to terms with it. At that point, I was under a doctor's care. I'm happy to share that I did go on anxiety medication. And at that point, when I came to terms with it and I had the tools, I think that's one of the most important things I learned during therapy. And I would always, my whole life, I would shy away from, oh, I don't need it. I don't need it. But they taught me the tools
Yeah.
to work with what I was dealing with, and I still deal with anxiety today. But it took another year
Mm.
before I felt, and the doctor agreed that they were going to wean me off of the anxiety medication. And but I still deal with anxiety. I deal with it
Yeah.
every day. But I've come to terms with
Right.
anxiety, and one of the things that was always so funny. I would go into therapy, and my therapist would basically would say to me, "Okay, you're driving the bus. Who's in the bus today? Um, it could, and these were your emotions. Is it the love that's in the bus? Is it the happiness that's driving it?" For me, it was always the anxiety, and I
Mm.
always would walk in. I would say, "That biatch is driving the bus today, still." And it took a
Yeah.
year and a half before that biatch was kicked to the back of the bus.
Mm.
But she's still in my bus, and she's always still trying to drive that bus. But I had to learn what
Yeah.
to do to deal with that biatch.
So you got tools for self-management, basically,
Yes,
instead of having to go to somebody, although you could always drop in when you need to, I'm sure,
yes,
but instead of having to do it through chemical basis or
yes.
consistent
And
therapy.
as I said, I did. I was under doctor's care. I did go on the anxiety medication. I was on it for 2.5 years. Um, Strong enough, and I felt I had the tools. I was ready to start weaning myself off of that and trying to deal with it in a natural way.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that you found was that writing caused
Yes,
or created a
yes.
space for you to kind of relieve the anxiety pressure.
Absolutely, that's what worked for me. I think when you find something that you have a passion for, and it doesn't have to be writing.
Right.
You know what it is. You can't wait to get out of bed. When that creativity was flowing for me and the passion to do it, that anxiety was pushed to the back of the bus.
Mm-hmm.
So, but writing still causes many anxieties.
Different. Yeah.
So, but that definitely is a big help for me today, to just be able to sit down and just work with the creative part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me, it definitely helped. I didn't notice it right away, but when I was halfway through handwriting a book, I started to see that I was kind of not, it wasn't like an addiction, but I was getting something off of it. I started to notice that I was
Yes,
having a reaction of kind of more like a sense of contentment
mm-hmm.
after the process and an excitement to get back to it instead of
Exactly.
dread or anything like that. It was like, ooh, my head would be formulating, and it was just really nice to be able to get it out. And I feel like, again, a lot of people have a whole bunch of ideas maybe they're more hands-on crafty.
Hmm.
That once you start doing something like that, it really relieves pressure, and it may be anxiety related, but
Hmm.
it's like a creative pressure builds up, and sometimes you just have these ideas that they have to get out.
Yeah. And for me, the bottom line is when you if you just concentrate on yourself, that is the
Mm-hmm.
worst thing. When you pull yourself away from yourself and you are able to find something you love, a hobby or something. That's what it started for me. My writing didn't start as a career, it started as a hobby.
Right.
My goal was to become a traditionally published author.
Hmm.
So when I made that goal for myself, and it's a little over 10 years now, back then self-publishing was still taboo.
Right.
So I would just write. I would write manuscript after manuscript. And it was, and I would be sending it in, and then it was snail mail. You would send
Yeah.
it in through the mail, and then you would send it email. And it was finally my fourth manuscript that it was 10 years that I signed the contract with the small publishing house
Hmm.
for the publication of the book. And yeah, so it was just absolutely wonderful. But then again, you realize other anxieties come in with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
but my
and that,
point is, yeah,
yeah.
a
Well, I think
hobby.
that comes about because it turns
Mm.
into like a job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it turns into a job that you love.
Right.
And just the creativity part for me. And I love to write in fantasy because reality, among other things, is too real for me.
Yeah.
And I am known as an author for my quirky titles, which come from stories in my life.
Hmm.
But that's all the fun part of it.
Yeah, I have heard of the Tiger book from the title. I
The
know it. I
title,
know
yeah.
it from the title. And tigers love bubble
Tigers
baths.
tigers love bubble baths and obsession perfume. Who
Yeah.
knew?
Who knew? Right. No.
And
Yeah.
it is absolutely true.
Yeah.
And so several years ago, I had visited a wildlife reserve in St. Augustine, Florida.
Hmm.
And it's like a nursing home for old, big cats,
Oh.
lions and tigers and jaguars. And at the end of the tour, I step up to this vat. Gosh, it was like 15 feet wide, 5 feet high. I'm behind a very, very thin cage.
Hmm.
And above the vat is a wildlife handler. She's holding obsession perfume. So you're looking at bubbles just overflowing. And all of a sudden, out walks this beautiful 600-pound Siberian tiger,
Hmm.
walks across the plain, looks as though he's taking off a rope. He slips into this vat of bubbles, and the wildlife handler sprays obsession perfume on his tongue. And Nick, I stood there with my mouth open, and I could not believe what I was looking at. This jungle creature was human to
Yeah.
me
Right.
because it just lapped up the obsession perfume. So right there, I said, that is the title of my next novel. And basically it became a metaphor because the tiger was tossed aside like an old shoe. And they
Hmm.
can come from cable shows, TV shows. Back then, people were still able to have them as pets because there's
Hmm.
another thing I'll talk about, the whole Tiger King thing and
Right.
what it did for these incredible creatures. Love Tiger King or hate it. But at that time, so I said, it became a metaphor. I then created the whole world around this title, and that's where I start. And my protagonist was tossed, Angie Pantera was tossed aside like an old shoe after 25 years of marriage, and
Hmm.
she had to start out again. Now she's dealing with it's a murder mystery intertwined with romance. So she's dealing with one death after another, this poor woman.
Hmm.
And is she the killer or will she be killed?
Hmm.
So that was my first published novel. Tigers love bubble baths and obsession perfume. Who knew?
Yeah.
But what I wanted to tell you was, because my book had come out right before COVID.
Hmm.
And during COVID, Tiger King
Yeah.
had become
It's
so,
huge.
so popular, right? Well,
Within the
then
first
what,
couple weeks, right? That was like
right?
it was in March, I believe. It was like, oh, well, I'm stuck. What's on? And it was
Right? And it
yeah.
was love it or hate it. But what it did is it spurred activists, and they
Yeah.
approached Congress, and Congress passed the law that said you can no longer have a pet tiger.
Hmm.
And it
Wow.
became against the law in the United States. Yeah, they're beautiful.
Wow.
You want to cuddle with them, but there is no way in hell that you can get into a bubble bath with a tiger.
And they love bubble baths.
Oh
So
my God. They adore bubble baths. They could sit in a bubble bath all day. And the Obsession perfume, the reason they love Obsession perfume so much is that it has pheromones in it,
hmm.
and it calms them. And even handlers in the wild, they will spray rocks with
Really?
Obsession perfume.
Oh.
And so I've had some wonderful fun with that book. And at the Milwaukee County Zoo, two tigers, Tosh and another tiger, I forget her name now. This past Christmas, they had their own wish list, and Tosh and Kasha, and they
Hmm.
one asked for Obsession perfume, the other one asked for bubble baths. So we did this whole thing where we sent them Obsession perfume and bubble baths,
That's
and
fantastic.
it's fun.
Wow.
It's fun. Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so in the storyline, are there tigers in it?
Well, that's exactly what my publisher said to me. Mary, please tell me you have a tiger in a
Yeah.
bubble bath with obsession. Absolutely, it's the climax of my story. But they fought me on the title, well, because that's what publishers do.
Right.
They
Yeah.
fought me on the title, and they said, well,
Too long?
do you have any others? And I love long titles. Do you have any others?
Yeah.
I said, yeah. How about tigers love bubble baths and Obsession perfume? Who knew? Maybe with a question mark instead of an exclamation. So they finally said, fine, keep your title.
Right. Yeah, they have a say because they're going to be putting it out on their, like, well, that's a long title.
Yeah, but I'll tell you the feedback, because they do their work. They and people loved the title, and
Yeah.
they still do. And it's something that I love to talk about it on podcasts, because your audience, nobody realizes that tigers love the water, they love bubble baths, and they love Obsession perfume.
Right.
And you can go on the internet and take a look at that. And there's pictures of them, and you really, your mouth opens, because it's a jungle creature, but they just act so human in those bubbles. It's
Right.
amazing.
And it's a real thing. Like you will
Yes.
see videos and pictures, and yeah, it's not a made up. It's not
No.
a made up title.
No. So now I'm
It's
hoping
formulated.
Netflix would like it enough, because that could become a wonderful series, because it could really continue with different aspects of the story, even though it's just a one book.
Yeah. Now you're the one that you I guess, have you finished? Is it coming out? The girl in the
Yeah, well, the
Toile.
girl in the Toile wallpaper, you can see it behind me. Let me just go back, and you can see the tigers. The publisher,
Yes.
cover, they put the tiger in the bubble bath with Obsession perfume. But Nick, at that point, I was a published author.
Yeah.
And I went back to my publishing house, and I said, I have a fabulous idea. And again, the ideas begin with the title. I have an idea for a trilogy. And they said, well, thanks, but we're not doing trilogies. So we parted ways, and I ended up with another small publishing house, all female owned. They loved the idea of my trilogy. And the trilogy that it's called the Star Writers Trilogy. The first book of the trilogy is The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper, which is also behind me. But you see, it's a girl falling through and samples of Toile. Now, Toile, again, something that was in my life, it's in everybody's life. You just don't realize that it's called Toile. So I'll go on podcasts and you can even goof with me. I love it. They'll say to me, the girl in the toilet wallpaper. And
Well, I said toil.
and they'll look it up that way. People
Yeah.
don't know what Toile is, but what Toile is, it's right behind me. It's a very artistic wallpaper or fabric, and
Yeah.
it's two-toned, any two beautiful, vibrant tones, and it tells a story. It's not a mural. A mural
Right.
is one scene. What a Toile is several different scenes, and it tells a story. So I had this throughout my house when I lived up north in Connecticut. And I would walk past my Toile and I would say, I see betrayal, I see love, I see murder, I see this. So that began the story of the girl in the Toile wallpaper. And thank you for asking, because the second book in the trilogy will be coming out the end of the spring.
Oh, okay.
And yes, it's more, and it's a little bit of different trilogy in that the first book and the third book. The first book is The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper. The third book will be a return to The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper. The book in the middle is tucked in between the two earthly books, and it's ethereal. It's called the Star Writers Club. So it takes you, it's a theme from the first and the third book, and it kind of takes you into a world I had to create, which gave me a lot of anxiety, to tell you the truth.
Right. Well, that's one of the benefits, I think, with fantasy, is that you get to set the parameters, but then all of a sudden you're at the Tolkien level of tasks. You're like, oh, well, what about the languages? What about the names for things? And what are the boundaries to this world? So initially you think, well, I could do anything I want. It's my writing. But once you start to realize the boundaries that you have to lay out, I mean, it's everything. And the words that relate to other words and all that kind of, it becomes very complex very quickly.
Yeah. And it's amazing. My editor's always pulling me back. Nope, you still have to follow this. There are still rules of fantasy. I'm like, but it's fantasy.
Yeah, there's still hooks and all that fun stuff that you have to work in.
There are rules. It's amazing. There are rules in fantasy.
Yeah, but you're doing it. You call it a trilogy, right?
Yes, it's a trilogy. So the second book in the trilogy will be out. They can each stand on their own, which is what I love about trilogies. You know, you can read the third one before you read the first one, because I tie it in the beginning. Then the second one is more of the theme that takes you to a real fantasy world.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. And I had to look up Toile. I had to look it up. And I said, well, I got to do a little research here because I don't know what I'm talking about. Linen cloth, I guess, is the French word or whatever. But
and it's been around for centuries.
Yeah, colonial era.
Yep, but you know what? It doesn't have to be colonialish. It can be anything your heart desires. Again, it's like a fantasy. It can be contemporary. It could be architectural. It could be historical. It's just that it is a two-toned, like an expression within scenes, but such vibrant colors. And that's, I think, what always drew me to Toile was the vibrancy of the colors. And then you're looking at it and you're like, okay, there's something that's going on there. So I said, yep, that was my next one, The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper.
Yeah, that's great. Now, what about how long is it taking you to write a book?
It takes me a good year.
A year
to write a book, and because I am editing it and editing it and editing it. And then once you approach your publishing house and they agree to it, they assign you to a creative editor. And that is a whole other yearly process. So really from the moment that I personally, I mean, it's different. Nowadays, things are different between self-publishing and co-publishing.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
so it's a good 2 years before an idea that I develop is actually published.
Yeah. And are you finding the way that it was before versus the way it is now? Is it easier now because of technology?
I truly think a whole new world has opened up because before I spent years, my first manuscript, I spent 2 years, Nick, sending out and a fortune, making copies and everything. And what came back was you had to build a thick skin, rejection after
Mm-hmm.
rejection after rejection. So there are many, many wonderful authors that may have never, their work may have never seen the light of day because publishing houses can only publish so many books.
Right.
And once you break in, it's like same thing as acting. But now what's happened in the last, the last 5 years, 5 to 8 years, publishing world has changed. And it's because of the technology. Now, self-publishing is not the taboo it was before.
Right.
You still have to be careful. I mean, if you're a writer out there and you want to self-publish, you know, there are still unscrupulous places that you might fall into. So you have to do your homework because you're going in like I would have gone in blind. You don't know what's involved. It's a tremendous amount of work that's involved.
Yeah.
But you do have that world open to you, the self-publishing world that was not there before. Then there's co-publishing. That was
Mm.
never there before, which is a partnership with the publishing house. And yeah, you'll have to pay some money, but maybe you don't have to pay that fortune you may have had to pay in the past or maybe still today. Just be careful with self-publishing
Yeah.
because there's still issues with it, but it's a wonderful way to get your foot in the door. And many authors are finding, boy, they'll find their own audience. And because of social media, the world has changed also. Authors have to be on social media. Now, before, like small publishing houses with the marketing, they're not able to give you as much marketing. And even a large publishing house, they have their tiers of authors,
Right.
but they expect you to do a lot of social media stuff too.
Yeah. Social, do your
Yeah.
own promoting,
Yes.
and also they'll promote as well. But that's, I think, one of the benefits of uh, being under a publisher is that there is direction.
Yes.
When you're self-published, there's an expectation that you just put it out there and people are going to buy it, and that's typically not how it works. Getting a prod and getting motivated to
Yeah.
do some self-promotion and advertising and that sort of thing. It's just easier when somebody's telling you, okay, we got to get this on the, we got to get this
Yes.
moving,
Yeah.
versus having to muster up all of that yourself to
Right.
do it.
And one of the most incredible things about a book being published is the manuscript that is handed into a publisher is not what becomes the book.
Yeah. Right.
The idea's there, they work with you, but that book goes through, my manuscript has gone, and it's still going through so many different layers and layers because they really know what they're doing.
Right.
They can take a wonderful, great idea and they'll bring it to this most incredible level. And, that's where you have your love-hate relationship with your editor, but they know exactly what they're doing. And I mean, there are times I'll fight for things because I know my story inside out. No, I can't give that up. But other times you just have to let go and follow their lead. But it's amazing. So like one of the things with self-publishing is you need to have your work truly edited. So that's a whole other aspect. I think one of the most important things in having a book published is the editing because it does bring it to a whole other level. And the reason you want a story that is flowing and flawless, and my publishing houses have always said it to me, you want it to be that way because of the reviews.
Right.
They will kill you And I mean, the reviewers, and like, honestly, a publisher will tell you, as many times as a copy editor will go through it and you go through it, there's always going to be something that falls through the cracks.
Yeah.
But these reviewers are able to find it now and then.
Somehow.
So within the industry, you're allowed a certain percentage of flaws. Like the reader, you're reading through it fast. Like my books, Nick, are easy reads.
Yeah.
Okay. I write to bring you into another world, to get you away from reality. I want to put you in a fantasy world where you can enjoy it, and and you learn that you're bringing the reader. It's like the reader becomes the character, especially the main character, because you want to learn how to show what's going on instead of just telling.
Right.
But again, that's fiction, and nonfiction is a whole other world by itself, as I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah. Now, do you do any nonfiction? Or has it been all purely?
No, I'm purely fiction. But I've been to some seminars with the nonfiction, and it takes you into a whole other level. Like people that write nonfiction books, they can have their they can have their own business just speaking about the idea of a nonfiction book.
Right.
So it's truly a whole other world.
Different animal. Yeah.
Yes.
It can be a whole world built on that book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful, because that's the way some people love to go. Yeah. But I love to write in fantasy.
Yeah. Again, something about fantasy that it doesn't have to be based specifically on anything aside from what you want it to be based on. Yeah. You just have to hold to that through the whole story, which that's great. And do you do any other kinds or forms of creative endeavors to, kind of change things up?
You mean besides writing?
Yeah, like any other hobbies or...
Yeah, I mean, I do. I love to be with, like, even though I'd love to be with my family, and I love to do traveling, and but otherwise I love to come back and just, like, for me, one of the most wonderful things is to sit down and start writing a whole new book. Because, again, the books that I just finished, one of the things I find as an author, I begin the book, it's oh my God, the exhilaration, it's so wonderful, and creating. And I finish the book and I'm depressed.
Yeah.
Because it was like I created something. This was my baby. Right. That's what authors feel, and writers. And it's like, you don't want to let it out into the world, because they're gonna kill it, with the review. But I'm very humbled to say both of my books right now, the Tigers Love Bubble Baths and Obsession Perfume, who knew, has won 8 awards. Garnered 8 awards. And The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper, again, I'm very humbled and thankful to the readers, but and the reviewers, because it has now won 6 awards. The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper in fantasy, science fiction. It's been compared to Doctor Who and A Wrinkle in Time. So it's really done very well.
Now, how does that storyline go? I can sense that something about time travel, or...
You got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Doctor Who element was kind of giving me a little...
Yes. So I have that aspect within my story, within The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper.
That aspect of time travel.
Time travel, yes. Yeah.
Well, and I think that the little quick blip that I looked up what Toile Wallpaper is made me think of Victorian era homes and dress, and it made me time travel. It made me in my mind, just thinking about what that means, or what could be in the book, made me move backwards to a time that I don't know, but that I sense related to the clothing and when the wallpaper was in fashion, maybe at the turn of the 1900 century.
And what I did was I put characters into the contemporary present time, and my protagonist She comes from a different time, and she's placed into the Toile wallpaper
Mm.
because of loyalty to her family. But one theme that I did take is where she would have to marry somebody that she truly did not love. And so she's betrayed. So I take that whole aspect, I weave it into the present, and then, I bring characters in that try to help her. And what I do is like, I like to have like layers of onions within each of my stories because I have many things that go on. It's not just one aspect. I have several romances, a coming of age, a 20 something, a 30 something, really for the first time, and unfortunately divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So I weave a lot of different things within the story. So I give it many different layers.
Yeah, it allows the person to kind of move and traverse
Yes.
emotionally through different states. Yeah, that's great. And as far as the trilogy, you've got the next one coming out. It sounds like June.
Yes.
So that'll be very timely for this show. And are you already? Would that mean that it's been done 2 years and you're already working on the third?
Well, when I submitted my idea, the first manuscript was completed. The second manuscript was halfway through. So I was still like, I'm always working on it. So I am the third one, which would be published next year. I'm a little bit over halfway through on the manuscript of that. Because what happens is when you write a trilogy and you're working with the editor, things can change. So moving from that first book into the second book, whereas I had an idea, I had to go back to the manuscript in the third one, and I had to revise certain things, bring in new characters. So there's a lot to be said.
That happened because things shifted. The storyline, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it's the publisher, the editor wants it to go a certain way. And sometimes they have such incredible ideas of where you want to take it.
Right.
So.
And that leads us back to what's a very commonly missed thing. And I think that a lot of self-publishers will run into this issue, is that knowing when to get help. You have this thing and maybe you've edited it once, this book creation, but something's missing or you feel the flow is off. That's when help is needed. And that is a job all into its own. The editing is definitely somebody works it. And
if there's anything I could say to any writers out there, having a creative editor will be the key to your book.
Yeah.
And eyes that look at it in a different way than you do, because we become just like a mother, father. Yep. We become so protective of our baby. You don't want to let it go. No. because seriously, what they do is it's like they cross out every line.
Yeah, a lot of red.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I come from a family of writers. It's mostly nonfiction. My mom did a story that she wanted to do it as a screenplay and then turned it into a book, but I don't think it's been published. But she was like, you'd have to get it ready and then it has to see somebody else. It has to be, somebody else's eyes have to read it, look over it. Because I guess when you've got your baby all finished, there's an and or an as that has just been, completely missed, multiple times or something like that.
Exactly. Or
can't read your own stuff.
Right. And you're too redundant. And they say, do not give it to a spouse or another family member because they're too ingrained in your happiness.
Yeah.
So they won't be as honest with you as truly as you need to be honest. And exactly like what we go through our lives, everything is a journey, everything is a learning curve, and it's the same thing with being an author. It's always a learning curve. You have your ups, you have your downs.
That's very similar with anxiety and knowing when to reach out. Like, now's the time, and you get help, and somebody it's a professional, and it's not like I'm reaching out to a friend. You're reaching out to a third party that hopefully
Yeah.
doesn't know you at all, they can have a complete perspective adjustment for
Yeah.
you. It's just different. You don't reach out to a friend and hope to get the same kind of advice when you reach out to a professional for that same kind of advice
Exactly.
or that same issue. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we were talking about that, I'm like, I'm so happy that I had gone through that part of my life. Now I can say that. Then when I struggled with it, it was hard.
Yeah.
But once you're able to deal with it, then you have the tools. Because as I said, Nick, I still anxiety doesn't go away for any of us,
Right.
but if you have the tools to help you, and by all means, if people need medication, I'm not going to say, don't take it.
Right.
That's something you need to discuss with your doctor, but it's a journey.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of finding equilibrium.
Yeah.
And if you're really far out on left or right field, equilibrium might not be self-managed equilibrium. You got to get to a point where you can hit ground or hit some kind of firmament, and then
Yeah.
work off to get to that self-control portion. The control method of healing is balancing, but sometimes the balance beam is way set to the side. You really have to get help and get to the point where you're able to you know get to the point where you're able to self-manage, which I think for some
Yeah.
people that doesn't happen. They need to have concurrent therapy or concurrent help.
Yeah.
But for me, I always think for myself, the goal is to um, not be under control of something else. I need to be in control of myself, medicine
Mm.
wise or anything like that. Tools, but
Yeah.
temporary, no matter what.
Right. You hope. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And if for anybody out there that is suffering from anxiety, um, what would be your advice for them?
I always say, never give up on yourself. Love yourself, and do not be ashamed. That for me was the worst thing I could have done. When I look back now, I say to myself, what was I ashamed of? That I couldn't handle something? That because to me it was like, boy, I can handle everything, and you couldn't. So it's like, love yourself, give yourself the time, seek the help that you
Seek the
need,
help.
and never belittle yourself about it or let anybody belittle you about it.
Yeah, and self love. That's very
Yes,
important too. Yeah, respect yourself, seek help, and don't beat yourself up over it. I think that shame and guilt.
exactly.
That's where that shame
Right,
guilt thing comes in.
right. We
That's
carry so much guilt around. It's like, when it comes to something like that, it's like, don't be ashamed, don't feel guilty, get the necessary steps, do what you have to do to make yourself, because if you love yourself and you take care of yourself, you can do everything else you need to do in the world. Your health is number one.
right. And yeah, exactly. And if that's self care, and
Yeah,
that's the way you're going to find ground and be able to move forward out of whatever the
yeah.
thing is that's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I always love to say when I'm interviewed is just to never ever give up on yourself. If you have a dream, if you have a passion, for me, this was like my second chance in life,
Yeah.
because here I became the empty nester. This was, my degree, my background was in financing.
Mm-hmm.
So this was just a passion that was always on the back burner, never had the time to get to it. And now at this point in my life, and as I said, Nick, it didn't happen overnight. And still today, it's just one stepping stone after another. But it's a wonderful journey for me because it's part of my soul and it's what I love. So if you have that passion for something, anything, doesn't have to be writing, never give up on yourself, and don't let anybody put you down, because believe me, rejection after rejection after rejection, you have to build up a tough skin, and that's hard. And sometimes if people are always trying to put you down, just go la 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 la. stick with your desires. And, don't give up your day job. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, right.
If it's, take it in small steps, and you're going to have your ups, you're going to have your downs. But I always say, I can promise you, if you stick with it and it's a passion that's part of you, it'll happen for you too. Not necessarily overnight,
Right.
but it'll happen.
Yeah. Have you gotten, have you had anybody come up to you and tell you that your book has really helped them? Any kind of really great, are you doing like book signings or anything like that where you're seeing people?
One of the things I do a lot of are podcast radio interviews, because one thing that happened, and it's so sad, for an author to be able to go into these independent bookshops. COVID closed so many of them down that it's really, really sad, because my books are, okay, they're on Amazon, but I'm on Barnes and Noble. I'm in any independent bookstore. Maybe the book's not on the bookshelf, but you just give them the name of the book. They get it the next day. So that took away a lot for authors. All these independent bookstores that had closed.
Now, have they reopened, or is it still kind of like a struggling?
Some of them just closed, and that was it. They were gone. Like even we knew years ago, I don't, where you are, like we had a Borders, Barnes and Nobles is left, Borders is closed. But I do. And it's so wonderful when you have a reader come up to you and say, oh, I love your story. It's just so nice to sit there. And like I said, I'm an easy read.
Yeah.
I'm not there where you have to be thinking of worldly things. You just get into it, and I take you on a journey.
Would you say it's like a beach book, something to take to the beach?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, that's, and that being one thing with bookstores closing, is that just such a great memory of being able to go to a bookstore and discover new books. And maybe it's the old-fashioned way, because it's not based on an algorithm of, you may like, you stumble upon a book in the shelf that's right by a different book that maybe you're looking for, and you say, oh, this looks good too.
Yeah, and I'm a little worried about the future in terms of, will we have a book to hold? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because you've got your ebooks, which is fine. You can carry 1,000 books to the beach with you, which is wonderful too. But there's just something about holding up a cookbook or holding up any type of these beautiful books, like about art and whatever. And you don't have that. Just like holding a magazine,
Yeah, same thing. Exactly.
Same
Magazine,
thing.
Newspaper.
Yes.
Just something about holding and reading with something that's not self-illuminated or has to be plugged in, or you have to remember to plug it in.
Yeah.
Or gets too hot out in the sun. It's a lot of little things that just don't work with the Nooks and the tablets and whatnot. But it seems to be there's no way around it. But again, I think as long as the actual printing itself doesn't shut down, then there will always be books. It's just one of those things that there's a love for it. I saw there was a big. I worked at Barnes and Nobles for a while, and it was during I want to say Borders had already closed.
Yes.
But it was when the Amazon Fire or whatever it was, the tablet that they had for the reader that they had came out, and Barnes and Noble came out with their Nook. So it's just a lot of this fierce competition happening, kind of under the shadows. There's this war of book, having the right to have a store almost is what it seemed like. The most important thing for Barnes and Noble was to get as much digital sales as possible, so that they could, I guess, look good in front of their competitor, the Amazon.
Yeah, and it's probably what helped them survive too.
Yeah, and it's still around, so it worked. But I also read prior to the pandemic that there were a lot of independent bookstores starting to pop up that were kind of wanting to fill that gap because people do like to kind of go in and,
They did.
look at books the old-fashioned way. But as far as the future goes, a lot of it seems to be heading towards AI generated content, and
Oh, it's a whole other thing.
yeah,
Yes.
it seems to be going that way, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And uh, you know, it sounds very original when you read it, and the things that the AI can do, but it still needs to be edited, definitely. But it can self-edit, and something that
It
I've been worried about.
it truly is amazing, and I've been asked that question just recently. As an author, how do you feel about AI?
Yeah,
And it's there. It's there. And I mean, if somebody can go up to it or just say to it, "Hey, write the next best-selling book," but I'm always thinking, oh, we all authors, we have these other ideas that AI
yeah,
might not, which
yeah.
is what you hope.
Well, and I agree with that. I think that's accurate. I think that they can be prompted, and
Mm-hmm.
and at some point it'll self prompt. It'll
Yeah.
prompt itself. But I think that there's something about humans and organic life that artificial life never will have. And if they become the dominant thing, the dominant intelligence on the planet, they're still going to need us. So we're still going to have use, right?
Right. But I can see it now, Nick. There's going to be a section in Barnes and Noble now, AI books.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
guarantee it the way it's going.
You're actually, that's probably a good thought there. That's probably an accurate statement if
That'll
they
be a
say that it's
category.
written by
Yeah.
AI, because they would have to say, oh, this book was written by AI. They don't,
Yeah.
who knows?
It'll have its own wall.
I don't have to. Yeah, something that was concerning me was that teachers were worried that their jobs were going to be taken away. And if a teacher's job is taken away, what's the point of the student?
Yeah, and to me, it's even sadder if the student uses the AI to do its homework
Right,
for them,
the cheating
Be-
factor.
because it would be so easy. You're not. I mean, you have to make mistakes. You have to learn. You have to grow. And if mom and dad do everything for you,
Yeah,
right?
right.
The
That
same
changes
thing.
the way you're raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, teachers are scared of the cheating factor of
Yeah.
like,
They
but
should be.
what that becomes then is that teaching has to be less neutral and more proactive towards an active in-person
Yeah.
schoolwork, essays in person, things that aren't done later, or like lowering the homework to almost nothing is what I'm thinking is going to have to
Right.
happen.
Right.
Like homework, no, we don't do that. There's no such thing. You go home and you can do whatever you want, but you come to school to learn. And I think it has to go that way. It has to just be a shut off of that, because if you get an AI to do the teacher's job, then the AI can be teaching what, a human to do what's going to be what the teacher did. So
Right.
therefore, an AI could do what the teacher did. The AI can be the student and the teacher. There's no point in the school. So
Exactly.
it nullifies the need for learning, which is dangerous. It's
Yeah.
terribly dangerous. So I think that it just have to do what probably every teacher has wanted to do with technology and phones, is just put them outside and leave them out and no access. You know,
Yeah.
um, but for some people, it's another means of creative, communication and creative outlet,
Hmm.
much like programming and writing.
Right. I
Uh,
agree.
you know, some people get for the design and all of that. They actually enjoy working with AI. So it goes both ways, I guess. Where can the public at large find your work?
Well, thank you for asking me. They can visit my author website, www.mary, M-A-R-Y, K, Savarese, S-A-V-A-R-E-S-E.com. I can guide you to Amazon, but I'm in Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I'm in any independent bookstore. If you can support them, please
Even better.
do. But my books are everywhere, and I want to take you on a journey. I want to, give you a place to cuddle up with a story and take you on a fantasy and get you
Yeah.
away from reality.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we all love that kind of book, and it kind of, like I said, a beach book where you just have something
Yeah.
to read. Yeah, absolutely. We'll have your website linked in the description.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate you being here today.
Oh, it was terrific. It went by
Yeah.
so fast. I can't
Yeah.
believe it.
Does that. And I'd love to have you back on when the next book is all squared away. And
I will be in touch.
yeah,
Absolutely.
excellent.
Because that's a whole other level.
Yeah, well, that
But
sounds like
thank
that's going to
you.
go into the ethereal
Yes.
realms. Yeah, so that'll be fun. And I'll have to get the first one and get digging into it to get the storyline going. Excellent. Well, have a good night, and until we talk again,
Thank you very much.
take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.